Hello, and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a podcast and video series on the topic of designing better miniature games. Glenn Ford and me, Mike Hutchinson, have designed some miniature games. I hope that each one that we have designed has got better, but if it hasn't, here's the place that we're going to figure out why and try and do better. Sorry, thanks. One thing that I've never done is convince anyone to publish one of my rule books with a hobby section in it. I grew up on GW rulebooks and White Dwarfs, where you always had a section explaining how to cut out bits of foam and bury books under blankets, and generally paint miniatures and assemble cardboard buildings and such like. And indeed, sometimes they gave you cardboard buildings to assemble. It's not very in fashion right now to have that sort of hobby content in a rule book. We talked a couple of episodes ago about the place of miniature photography versus illustrations in your rule book and how that kind of communicates the game and the hobby and the fantasy and everything. And we kind of didn't quite touch on this topic, but I think one thing that is it feels quite old school, but I guess I'm intrigued about whether it ought to, is this idea that in a game that is encouraging you to do DIY hobby and to assemble things, why don't we see and put more hobby content in our rule books, and should we? I've got some feelings on this, but Glenn, you've also got some feelings.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of weird because it's like we don't write a set of fantasy rules and then like the fluff bit is there are wizards and orcs and stuff and they battle, right? Blah blah blah. Let's get on with it.
You'll figure it out.
You'll figure it out, right? You know fantasy, battling, right? Let's go. We don't have like a line of sight section.
Well, to be fair, most Osprey Bluebicks are roughly that.
Well, not a million miles off of it.
I mean, that's what Gaslands is. You know cars, you know flamethrowers. Come on, crack on, people.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. And like rule sections, like we'll often have rule sections that could be 6 inches cross there. You know what you're doing. Get on with it, mate.
Yeah.
But we obviously don't, and yet we go and then just assemble 20 highly detailed post-apocalyptic science fiction miniatures, and next. And it's like
yeah, and place them on a beautiful scaled terrain arrangement.
given, either fully manufactured or you could purchase one from, several fine manufacturers.
Right, and so and it's interesting because like in your example there, like move 6 inches, you know what I mean. Like the answer to that is not because you can go and find lots of hobby blogs and people on Instagram that will tell you how to play this game and how to measure correctly and how line of sight works in Gaslands or whatever. But like it's fine that like I guess because hobby is sort of cross game, like, but like
yeah, it's like I totally think if I wrote a skirmish game that said you can move up to 6 inches in the normal skirmish game manner and left it at that, a significant number of people reading it would go, all right, yeah, fair enough. I reckon I could probably wriggle my way through that one if I don't put too many like other.
Okay, design challenge alert. Write the most non-specific rule book that can still be basically functioning.
Yeah, but when it comes to hobby, we're pretty happy to like drop some pretty substantial like gauntlets on people and then just wander off and be like, no big thing. I don't know what, and I think a bit of it is because we're worried about being too prescriptive. I think a lot of it is because we're worried about being a bit old fashioned. Because it's like you say, this is so the sort of GW that I grew up with as a kid that had these.
Yeah, and we've since learned that comes from like the even more DIY rule books of the 60s and 70s, where you literally had to purchase a book and then they would explain the basics of it because there wasn't even like magazines or internet or anything that you could look at.
Yeah, no, there's some lovely bits in some old Donald Featherstone books where he's explaining how to build and pour your own metal miniatures into molds and things, which is just beautiful in what is fundamentally a rule book for playing the games. It's like, well, this is how to like carve them out of soapstone, and you know,
Yeah.
and it feels very alien. And I don't know whether it's like because of designers of modern games, we're designing games that are very game-like, and they're maybe not hobby objects.
Yeah,
Um,
and I've talked a lot about how I think physical preparation is such a critical part of the loop of making these games work. You know, there's mental preparation, physical preparation, playing the game, and then kind of post-game analysis leading into the going around the loop again. And yet we don't really do a ton to support that outside of including photographs that provide some kind of indication or aspiration, and then providing kind of rules to generally describe the sorts of terrain or sorts of factions and miniatures that we're going to get. But I
yeah,
suppose, like from my point of view, and the reason I'm feeling more and more interested in this is that as soon as Gaslands came out, there were a couple of things that people just wanted and needed to know straight away. And
oh,
it's like, do you superglue the wheels? How do you get the two halves of a Hot Wheel car apart? Turns out you get a large drill bit and you drill the head off the rivets.
hmm.
Like what are some of the basic things that I can use to make mesh windows or barred out windows? And I just feel like, and like even something as simple as how do I make race gates, which even now, like 7 years later, I've just realized the answer, and it's like get some putty and stick a car upright into it, and that's perfect.
Hmm.
Like some of those things, like if they'd have just been in a little full color section in the center of the Gaslands rulebook, then it just would have removed some of that initial sort of uncertainty about how I get from the very, very basic understanding to just like this first level of engaging with the game. And particularly because Gaslands had the privilege of being something that, for whatever reason, just seemed kind of non-threatening to non-miniature gamers. And we have had quite a lot of board game fans walk past the table at board game conventions and sort of get interested and then get sort of slightly quizzical and maybe frightened of the fact that it's like, well, where's the terrain? Like, how do I make the terrain? How do I make this stuff?
Hmm.
And I can point at these things that I've deliberately made some quite ropey scenery for these things that are like literally toilet rolls and stuff painted gray. It's not, it's not beautiful 3D printed, it's not other people's hard to obtain stuff. It's not even that sophisticated in its build. And so if I'd have also included in the central place, like, here's how to get an old Pringles tube and an old toilet, kitchen roll thing and bit of texture paint them gray. The magic is you do some hazard stripes somewhere, and now everyone thinks it's brilliant.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
just I just think it would have done a lot of work, and I think it will. I think it should and can do a lot of work. I suppose the problem is that it feels almost a bit generic in some contexts. Like if I'd have put a hobby section in Hobgoblin, which had some very general ideas of like, here's how to create a general fantasy building or a pile of rocks. It's like, well, what's the value of this providing to this game specifically? Whereas I could have learned how to like make rocks out of foam from a trillion places on YouTube and hobby blogs and
yeah, and I think this is one of the major sort of considerations for this is, yeah, I totally think that Gaslands is in respect to this in a very different place from Hobgoblin.
mm,
I think that anybody in the hobby should have a ballpark idea of how to get together stuff for Hobgoblin. And it's been interesting again, the number of people who have come into Hobgoblin as like their first miniatures game, and don't have a lot of the assumptions. It's like in the Hobgoblin, the Electric Studios Discord, people were sort of saying, how big should a forest be? And I'm sort of trying to say, well, think of the footprint of your unit and like an inch bigger than that in every direction. That's a really nice starting point. And they just have no like,
right, which when you think about it is a really weird size for a forest.
yeah.
Like
Because
that's not even a coppice. Like but we have experimented and been given plastic forests from GW, and are
yeah,
used to having things that are about the size of an A4 piece of paper, as are the largest size of terrain you can make is something from an A4 piece of paper. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I've been to 100 conventions, 100 tournaments. I've got an accretion of knowledge of what a tabletop looks like for playing miniatures war games on that people that don't do this don't have.
Right. And so like as an indie designer, it's easy to fall into the thought pattern that like I am almost certainly someone's 12th miniature game.
Hmm.
And yet with Gaslands and maybe with Hobgoblin as well, it turns out that's not true. And actually I might be someone's first miniature game. And I don't know if that's a privileged position to be in, but at least it makes me stop and think like, maybe I should be considering what it's like if because like every RPG forever has always started with the like, what is an RPG? Like, how do you do that? And it gets really annoying because I've read 100 RPGs and I don't want to read that stupid 3 paragraphs of what is an RPG anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably every time an RPG is published, it's probably someone's first RPG, and maybe that's useful. But
Yeah, I mean, but hopefully they have like a GM or somebody who's it isn't their first ever RPG. That's a more worry. There's nobody at the table who hasn't ever played an RPG before.
I genuinely think I read Vampire the Masquerade Second Edition before I'd ever played a role-playing game. So I think I was the person for Vampire the Masquerade Second Edition who read that bit and was like, I need an example of play. Oh, there's an example of play. Oh, thank God.
You are the example of your own that defeats your own question there.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, I think there's a big difference for like Gaslands. Genuinely, most people weren't playing in don't have a lot of experience of the scale of of Gaslands cars and don't do a lot of modeling in Gaslands.
Right. No one has a 20mm-ish terrain collection
Yeah,
until you
absolutely.
start playing Gaslands.
And at the very least, like knowing how to crack a Hot Wheel would have been a little thing to just drop into people to say, look, here's your first Hot Wheel, open it up, paint these bits, put it back together, would have been a nice thing. In a way that, yeah, I totally agree. Hobgoblin, it would feel a bit like, telling your grandmother how to suck eggs. It's a bit sort of, it's like, and not to sort of run the thing down, but in the Doomed, there's this thing about the kitbash mentality and how to kitbash and etc. etc. And I just felt kind of like, triggered by that section where it's just like I know how to put together miniatures. Thank you very much.
Right, but at the same time, I have incredibly fond memories of the kit bashing sections in like the old Chaos Space Marines rulebook from second edition 40k, where like there's these little sections and they've got black and white photos of the metal unpainted metal miniatures.
And yeah, and this is quite probably just something about my age or something, but GW get to tell me how to do that. GW get to
Well,
tell
they did when you didn't know how to do it.
No, I know, but it's like they have the eternal right because they are they have a grandfathered in right to tell you this sort of stuff, and nobody else does.
That might be true.
I think the thing I do think seriously, it is worth considering the weird out there hobby things you might be asking. So, for example, I'm working on a game at the moment that requires like 16 of these guys for people to play it. 16 4-inch long
Now
maximum.
that to me looks like an animated wall like you would find in the Portal video game. Is that it's a
That's
moving
exactly
wall.
what that one is intended to look like, and that is very much kind of how they work. But the point is, you need a whole bunch of them. And I could totally see somebody. I expect most people to have a bunch of small wolves in their collection, but I could totally see somebody coming to that game and going like, "Where am I going to get that many little wolves?" And the answer is you can get a sheet of foam board and you can score it and cut it out, and you can really
Right, with a biro and like £2 worth of materials, you can make this in like 20 minutes.
yeah, literally,
But
it's
you won't know that unless Glenn tells you that.
exactly. And so for that specifically, I want to put in a section, of me with a metal ruler, and a few very simple tools doing this thing and going like, look, here we go. This is like £4, and you've got the tabletop that because I know it's a weird ass tabletop. I'm asking you to use this thing with like it's basically flat and it's got a whole bunch of very specifically sized walls. And so giving you like 2 pages of a thing going, well, this is how to do it really quickly and easily and cheaply, I think is worthwhile in a way that also in that game, I require you to have some like sci-fi dudes with like laser guns. I'm not going to tell you how to get them, you know,
Right.
that I expect you to sort of be able to source under your own auspices. And so I think sort of registering what's out there about the hobby, and I do think it's one of these things why it's really valuable to, when you are play testing, when you're prototyping, whatever else it is, go through the hobby process that you're planning to put a player through. Actually don't just proxy all of your minis and have a blank table. Actually build the thing you're asking them to build
Right. Be
collection,
on some level the expert in making your game instantiated.
or at least be the first person that you put that through that pathway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't send a paying stranger down a roller coaster that you haven't been on yourself at least once.
So, couple of examples this brings to mind. One from today, actually. So we haven't mentioned Grimskull or Torch and Shield for a couple of episodes, so we better correct that. So I was checking out his website and noticed a really nice hobby blog post that was about how to create the dungeon pathways and sort of tiles that you need for the game. And again, it was, get some foam board. Here's how to carve it up so it looks good. And that provided this really practical way of instantly and very inexpensively creating what is actually, there is a million ways to create a sort of modular dungeon layout, but he's got a really simple one that looks pretty good with just a bit of work. And actually, if that's in the book and that's how everybody plays the game by default, and yes, it requires a bit of crafting, but so does buying 3D printed miniatures, sticking them together and painting them. It's not beyond the wit of man. That's super interesting. And it compared, in my mind, with what Sean Sutter had done with Relic Blades, Catacombs of Karai, a solo adventure one, where he's done something similar but not quite, which is he needs, because it's like a tactical RPG where you need a very specific dungeon layout for each level. He's said you need this number of specific pieces, and he doesn't tell you how to make them, but he draws these nice pictures that made me immediately go, oh great, I'll just get some foam and cut them out, and I get it. And so I think if you're a talented illustrator like Sean, you can get away with sort of drawing fun little versions of what it is. But what Grimskull has done with his blog post, I think, is also really powerful, and maybe I would love to have seen that in the rulebook. It's I'm asking you to get together a dungeon. You can use your Hero Quest board or your a random dungeon tiles from something else, but actually the canonical way of playing is this simple way of like with yours, getting some foam board and creating the walls that you need for this sci-fi race, this sci-fi action game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, there are different ways of engaging with the idea of hobby in your rule book. So in Puke Apocalypse, obviously there's a very full-on neon spattered sort of look to it. And there's a little paragraph where I say about what the look is and whether you might want to recreate it. You don't have to if you don't want to. This is a very extreme version of things. And then also, as you play through, you're meant to change your miniatures as things happen to them, to sort of to model their changes physically on the tabletop. And there are rules based around whether or not you're doing that. And within the sort of description of the gangs, there is a little section saying, this is what you might physically do to a miniature in order to represent, obviously there are certain mutations that say what they look like. For the ones that don't, you could just do this. This is a simple way, like the Von cultists' robes are meant to get darker and darker and darker as they get stained with vomit. You could just put another layer of wash on. That will represent the fact that they've gained a new mutation. This is a way you could do that, in the hobby. And I'm not showing you physically how to do it, but I'm talking to you about the fact that I'm asking you weird hobby things that you might not sort of be instantly comfortable with. And I'm sort of saying, well, here's a way of doing it. Here's a way of approaching it. Here's a way of imagining it, and then hopefully have fun with it yourself.
Yeah. And I think with Gaslands, the photographs in the book did some of that by showing my hodgepodge versions of it. And I think I really like the difference between like a hobby section in a GW book that tells you how to do the basic bodge job, but then it's also contrasted with like beautiful professional made terrain. And so you're given the first step on the journey, and you're given a vision of what the aspiration of like mastery is. And that, to me, like, even that classic Mike McVeigh progression of like 3 achievable steps and 1 completely unachievable like end state, like, where it's clearly different colors. They're like, the green is not the same. Like even that is like, has always provided that like first step and possibility of mastery thing. And so I don't know, it's intriguing. I think we're letting the miniature photography do a lot of the work in this area right now, and we're letting our ancillary marketing materials, social media, web stuff, video content, like do a lot of that lifting as well. And maybe that's fine because we're in a hypertextual, connected world right now. But at the same time, like, we are doing a slightly weird thing, which is creating an artifact and enshrining in that tome the ability to have a fun hobby experience and then a fun social experience. And of course, all of that stuff is connected, but like, if that's important, maybe it should go in the tome.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, also it might just be writing hobby sections are probably really hard as well. It's like quite often I've sort of thought, I sometimes try and do like painting videos or modeling videos, and I think, oh, I'll paint, and I've already painted it, and I'm like, oh no, I can't remember how I painted it, and I certainly can't recreate it now. Oh well, never mind. I'll do one.
I think it's a skill that requires practice for sure. Like, I'm no expert at it, but like, I enjoy, I have enjoyed in the past doing little tutorials, like basically just taking photos at various stages during like a build and then putting a blog post up where I punctuate that with me explaining what I have done. So I think it can be as simple as that, but I think it's a new discipline, it's a new skill it's a muscle that needs building if one was to decide to include it. And I think the decision to put it in the rule book rather than just stick it on the website of your game is an intriguing one. And only like one that only now am I kind of coming back to reassess, because I did genuinely ask Offspray if we could have a hobby section in Gaslands, because I just thought that would be good, and maybe I thought that it would be kind of nostalgic, and I was nostalgic for those hobby sections, and so I did like that idea. But now I've fallen into a pattern of not considering it, and so I'm coming up to the end of the year, like I'm reconsidering that and wondering about it.
Well, if you miss hobby sections in rule books, if you don't miss hobby sections in rule books because you've recently seen a really, really nice one, swing down into the comment section and tell us about the lovely one you found. Tell us about
you want to talk me down from the ledge of putting hobby sections in all my future rule books.
Or buoy Mike up into the idea of insisting on hobby sections on every single one of his rule books and fighting tooth and nail for them. I think they have a place. I think there are bits to them that are a good idea. I'm not sure that a full-fledged one in every book is necessarily right for everybody.
I mean, like, I've got a copy of Rogue Trader on my, like, the weird stuff. Like, there's some tutorials in Rogue Trader about making like tanks out of egg boxes and stuff. It's grand. It's grand.
We all remember the shoebox Land Raider and things of that nature. Yeah, if you've seen a good one of these, tell us about it in the comment section. If you've seen a bad one, tell us about it twice. While you're down there telling us about it, hit on the like and subscribe buttons.
All hail the algorithm.
It is our master and overlord. And then swing on past the Discord and tell us there about some splendid hobby sections that you've seen come across, somebody you really enjoy reading the hobby bits and books of. And for now, though, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it'll be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
See you next time. Bye.